Oral presentations. They are another staple of the business environment. Once again, the first thing you want to think about if you're doing oral presentations is audience and purpose. If you have audience considerations, it's often a mixed group of people from various cultural and linguistic backgrounds. You need to learn your audience's role within the organization, and you should learn about your audience's attitudes and personal experiences regarding your topic. So, in other words, if people know a lot about it, or think they know a lot about it, or have a negative idea about what you're talking about, these are all things to consider. As far as purpose considerations, do you want to inform? Are you there to instruct? Are you there to persuade? Now, sometimes, of course, even though this will be broken out into these three, you might be wanting to do all three of those things at once. So there are types of oral presentations. You think about informative presentations. The goal is to be as impartial as possible and to provide the best information. So for guidelines, you can keep the title of the presentation clear and factual. Stipulate at the outset that your purpose is simply to provide information, and be clear about your sources of information. In other words, make sure to use the proper formatting, APA, for example, to ensure that the sources are not plagiarized or people are not unclear about where you got your information from. When you think about types of oral presentations, there are training presentations. They're also known as instructional presentations. Once again, you want to indicate the training or the purpose of the training. Provide an overview of the learning outcomes. What can participants expect to learn from the presentation? And you should create slides or a handout that participants can reference later when they're trying to perform the tasks on their own. Persuasive presentations are made to influence people's thinking. You should have adequate research for both sides of the issue. You want to be clear from the start that you're promoting a point of view. You should use research and visual data. Charts and graphs are nice, for example, to support your stance. And you should consider and address counter arguments in advance and be prepared to take questions that challenge your point of view. Action plan presentations are made to get something done. Once again, you should be clear up front about your purpose. Present the research to back up the need for your plan. Show you've considered other plans, but that yours is the most effective. And then when you close, you want to restate what you want your audience to do. Sales presentations. Let the facts tell the story. Use examples to illustrate why your product or service is the best. Know your product or service and those of your competitors inside and out. You should display sincere interest in the needs and concerns of your customers and provide plenty of time for questions. I think that the first two are truly very, very important when you're in sales. You really have to know, particularly if you're in a technical field, you have to know what your product or service does, and you have to also know what the competition is in order to illustrate why your product or service is the best one. You think about parts of oral presentations. Once again, you have an introduction. Introductions capture your audience's attention. There are many ways to do this. You can tell a quick story, relate your topic to a current event, or to something else the audience cares about. This is a chance to establish your credibility by stating your credentials or explaining where you obtained your information. And you can also preview your presentation by listening to the main points and the overall conclusion. Otherwise, you have a body. When you have body, you want to use small chunks and use transitions just as you would if you were writing a paper. And then finally, you have a conclusion. You remind your audience of the big picture, restate the main points, and leave the audience with a final advice or tips. So once again, parts of an oral presentation mirror the parts of any sort of paper or a formal report, in that you have an introduction, you have a body, you have a conclusion. When you prepare oral presentation, you want to research and connect the topic to your audience. Know your topic very well. Keep track of your sources. The presentation will not be effective unless you can relate the topic to your audience. If they don't care, they don't care. You want to create an outline or a storyboard. It helps to organize your thoughts, and it helps to accommodate multiple visuals. So here's an example of an outline to prepare for oral presentation. Is introduction. Introduce yourself and open with a question. There's the body, the chunks of information you want to talk about, and then the conclusion. You want to restate your main points and then take questions. Here's another example. Introduce a problem. Describe the aquifer. So in other words, we're going to give the audience the information that they need and set the context. The other thing you want to do when preparing an oral presentation is determine a delivery style. You can be memorized, can be impromptu, can be scripted, can be extemporaneous. A lot of it depends on the situation and the audience that you're talking to. So here's a table of the advantages and drawbacks of the delivery style. Impromptu is obviously inventing as you speak. This can be a good way to do things if it's a small group, simple topics. The downside to it is the speaker may ramble, the speaker might lose track. Impromptu is the kind of thing that if you do it a lot, it can be very effective, but if you don't, maybe keep away from it. Scripted, if you read verbatim from a written work, you do this a lot of times if there's a strict time limit. If the speaker is highly nervous, you can do this. Very formal speeches. The drawbacks, it takes a long time to prepare, can't move around. It can be very boring. It also makes working with visuals difficult. Extemporaneous, of course, is kind of splitting the difference between the two. You speak from an outline of key points. Once again, moderately complex topics. If you have a somewhat flexible time limit, it's very good for visually based presentations. Some drawbacks, once again, speakers can lose track or leave something out, and they can fumble with notes, visuals, or equipment, particularly if they don't have a lot of experience doing extemporaneous speeches. So, preparing oral presentations, always choose your technology carefully, should suit your audience and purpose. Plan the use of your visuals. They can add impact to presentation, but they can also be overused. So you should really use them to drive home certain points that you want to make. Here's an example of some slides. There's a title page. There's the question for your introduction. There's a slide for the body presentation. As you can see in the bottom, there's the source information, and it's properly formatted. And then you have things like the conclusion slide, and you can have questions and discussion. Ask for other questions. So the final thing to think about preparing oral presentations, you want to practice your presentation, you want to rehearse it. You can record a video of yourself or practice your presentation with a friend. Now, the one thing I'll say that practicing is important, but really the most important thing is knowing your information well. If you know your information very well, then if you have a little fumble or things aren't going great relative to connecting with the audience, you'll have the ability to change up your strategy a little bit and to reconnect with the audience. And also, you'll also have the ability, if you get a little bit off track, to get on track easily. So preparing oral presentations, determine your audience and purpose, make sure you do your research and understand your topic, decide on your delivery style, organize your presentation, organize your technology, use your visuals, and make sure you rehearse. When you use presentation software, one thing you want to think about is base the choice of software on research. There are many options. You can see Prezi, PowerPoint. All slides should be clean, and do not rely too much on software. In other words, it's really the speaker and not how the presentation that counts. Another way that you might give an oral presentation is through video conferencing. This is more and more common in the workplace. Webinars are used for presentations to a group. Skype allows people to connect via real-time audio and video from a computer. Some special considerations: all participants must be available at the same time, so it requires some organization up front to be effective. If I was using presentation software and video conferencing, don't let the app do the thinking. You should always have a backup plan in case the technology fails. Don't distribute the handouts until you're ready to discuss the contents. Start with an overview slide. Find a balance between the text and visuals. And always avoid using too many slides. You shouldn't simply read slides. You don't want too much flash, so you don't want too many special effects. End with conclusions or questions. One thing you can do when you think about video conferencing, you can use it when necessary. So if people are long distance apart, it can be very effective. But if people are in the same area, a lot of times maybe it's better just to do it in person. And for video conferencing, you want to keep international audience members in mind. In particular, you want to think about time zones and that sort of thing. So some key points in delivering oral presentations. Many think the delivery of oral presentations is the most difficult to handle. You should seek advice from others to calm your nerves, and you're likely to find that you'll settle down after speaking the first line of the presentation. My best advice is to always remember that people aren't scrutinizing you nearly as much as you think they are. And in fact, it's your job to actually engage them, because a lot of people will have other things on their mind. So when you go to do an oral presentation, it's important to rehearse. It's important to know the material so that if you get a little bit lost or things aren't going very well, it's easy to go back to your reserve of information to calm your nerves and to better present. Once again, you should also dress for success, stand tall, and use eye contact. You want to take charge, you want to gesture naturally, and you should allow time for questions, comments, and discussion. The upshot is that if you present yourself in a confident way, you will be more confident in your presentation.